Welcome back. Time for another video review if you can stand it. In celebration of my very first one actually having 100 hits plus on YouTube, the ones that I know that weren't me checking out and seeing how awful I was. This time I'm going to talk about a really rather special film, The Woman Knight of Mirror Lake, a biopic of the Chinese feminist Qui Jin. The reason I looked at the Ebola syndrome last time was that Herman has become a director I've very slowly come to realise I really like rather a lot and enjoy much of his films, and I wanted to see the difference between his cult status in the Cat 3 Days, of which Ebola Syndrome is very much as one of his signature films, to what he's become now. You might remember last year I talked about the Ip Man prequel film he did, which, although Donnie Yen less and was far less involved in the martial arts side of things, actually looked at a more human side. It did make up an awful lot of stuff, but it was really concentrating on a relationship between a young man and a woman, and it was just an interesting and different way of looking at the story. So this time, the story of this Qui Jin, someone I'd never heard of before, although she seems incredibly important in the fight for women's rights, not just within China, but across Asia and indeed across the world, and she deserves this film. She's an interesting character. Even at an early age, she was fighting and questioning women's role in society. You know, why can't I study like my brother can? Why do I have to have my feet bound? And she was lucky enough, she was born into a rich family, but she was lucky enough to have a father who decided to let her explore some of these things. As she grew older, she became a poet, an essayist. She did things, shock tactics like dress like a man in public, which now probably seems passé, but then is really quite earth-shaking, one imagines. Lovely scene in the film where she's at a Peking opera and people are saying, "Why are you dressed like a man?" And she's saying, "Well, hang on a minute, that man up on stage is dressed like a woman, and you're paying to watch this." And that's the kind of thing she was poking at the conceits of Chinese society at the time. She did get involved later on with the rebellion against the corrupt regime at the time, the post-Opium Wars China, which was being torn apart both by the corrupt regime and the Western powers fighting over power within China. And unfortunately, that led to her eventual capture as part of a failed uprising and eventual death. But the thing about killing somebody who has such a powerful idea means that they become a martyr to the cause, and that what they're fighting for, what they're talking about, actually becomes more powerful. The film is structured in an interesting way. Quite often biopics can be really rather stodgy, and you go from the cradle to the grave and you just see little echo points of their life. This film does pretty much deal with those points, and you read her Wikipedia entry and you'll see pretty much everything there is in this film. But instead of going from A to B, it decides to start at B, look at the end of her life, her final few days, the events which caused her eventual death, and then counterpoint that with the forward progress of her life, almost thematically, if you like. It stars Yi Huang, who I was really impressed with in that recent Wong Jing film, Treasure Inn. I thought she was probably the best thing about it. I had no experience of her before. Traditionally, she's been a TV actress, and this really is the time where she stepped up to the plate and become a leading actress in her own right. She's not one of the great Chinese beauties, and actually I think that works in her favour here, because I think that would lessen the impact of the story if it was some wonderful glamorous supermodel type. But she's far from uneasy on the eye, don't get me wrong. But she manages to portray both the seriousness and the driven nature of her character. But also there's some nice bits where she actually is not a monster. She is human, she has real feelings, she regrets some of the things she's done, but her belief in what she is fighting for in that gender politics and in terms of nationalism, I think Yi Huang really pulls it off rather well. Not only that, though, it's really nicely supported. There are two magistrates who are involved in her conviction and eventual execution, and the ever fantastic Anthony Wong is the one handed the nasty task, but he's a man who actually respects her a lot and knows her as a poetess and respects her drive and ambition. and he's brilliant, really quite understated, but obviously absolutely torn by the nature of his job and his duty and to his country, and how he feels about this woman, Lam Suet, who usually these days seems to be comic relief in films, actually pulls out a really great performance, which he's more than capable of doing. He's in enough films to, I guess, to cover the whole range of roles. But he's a magistrate who's somewhat implicit in what Gui Jin's been up to, and so he finds it very important that she is going to get executed as part of her trial. There's great stuff with other parts of the supporting cast. Dennis To, who was Ip Man in the film I was talking about earlier, he plays a fellow revolutionary with which Gui Jin has a non-romantic relationship with. He's obviously an inspiring person to her and encourages her to take up the terms of fighting and uprising against the regime. But there's a certain frisson about their time together. But it's done in a really sensible, smart, and realistic way. Her husband, who Kevin Cheng, who is initially quite a weak man and quite obviously just going to be doing what society says. He's rich, he gets a job, he plays bird fighting, he gets upset when his wife gives him a female child first, and so on and so forth. But it's really quite clever because he grows and changes as the film goes on, actually as he gets less screen time. But we find when Gui Jin goes off to Japan to learn about what happened to Japanese women in the Meiji Restoration, that he's learnt that he is fond of her and that he does love her, and he takes a full and strong hand in looking after his children, which he could have quite easily been used as some kind of anti-feminist tool in this film and made to look quite weak, but actually he grew and changed, and I think that's important, and that's one of the things about this film. It's never preachy. It tells you a lot about the time and the place and the people and the personalities, but it doesn't try and ram it down your throat. And more importantly, what it doesn't do, which the Ip Man prequel also did, and Yao must be praised for this, is that he doesn't try and tie it in or give some kind of ridiculous coda which says, yes, and this is what makes China great now, because that's actually quite offensive in lots of ways to the people of the time and to those of us not in sort of communist China. This is a story about a woman who was fighting for women's rights, and yes, she was an important part of the change of what happened in the country, but she should first and foremost be considered important for what she did for women. The biggest compliment I can give this film is I didn't know about this person before, and ever since I've watched it, I've been hunting around the internet and trying to find more about her. It's a great, interesting story. There is a lot of martial arts in there, quite over-the-top, highly exaggerated martial arts. Some people may have a problem with this because although she did study martial arts, I don't think anyone's really going to pretend that she could probably take down Bruce Lee and Donnie Yen with one hand tied behind her back. But that's okay. For me, that is part of the genre. That's what happens in Chinese folk and real hero type films. They will be judged on what happens in the martial arts side of things. So it wasn't bad. They're very well filmed. They're quite exciting. My only criticism there is that the final scene is somewhat redundant because of the structure of the film, that we know really what's going to happen at the end. So whilst it's exciting within itself, the outcome between the two main protagonists in the fight is pretty redundant because we know that one died right at the beginning of the film and the other one was still around at the beginning of the film. But I thought it was a uniformly excellent movie, right up there with Wuxia as possibly my films of the year, which will be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Just wonderful, brilliant, highly, highly, highly recommended. Go and see it.